Hello and welcome to the Hands Up If You're Human podcast, an ongoing series of conversations dedicated to exploring the messy reality of being human. The truth is, there is nothing you can say, think, feel, do, or experience that isn't 100% human. So it's time to drop the guilt and the shame, embrace who we really are, and start to create a life we really want to live. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Wyndham. I am the Blueprint Coach. And I am very pleased to be joined by a guest today who is a bassist, guitarist, composer, band leader, arranger, educator, producer, music software developer, intrepid captain of the groove ship Funkestra. Thank you very much, allaboutjazz.com, for that. A wine connoisseur, a sci-fi fan, and a passionate badminton player. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast, Stefan Redtenbacher. How are you, Stefan?
Wow, thank you for this introduction. I feel like I'm maybe in the wrong place. I don't know who you just introduced there. I mean, wow. Well, thank you. I'm very good. Thanks for having me on this podcast.
Thank you for coming. It's interesting because we've known each other a couple of years, and the amount of times we've spoken about your professional career, the music side of stuff, is vanishingly small. So the fact that most of that intro is all about the music stuff, it fascinates me. First question, what is missing from that list?
Gosh, I think you nailed it, I think. I mean, there's loads there. So I think that's good. I think you don't want to overburden people with too many job descriptions.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because what I find about this particular approach to the intro is these are just labels, and they're, when we've spoken about the music side of stuff, you've got to go, oh, I'm not interested, it's boring, it's this is that. I'm much more interested in the people behind whatever it is that they do for a living, which brings us to the point of this podcast. So this season, I'm really interested in exploring different people's perspective on freedom. So my first proper question for you is, what does finding your freedom mean to you?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, being a musician, first and foremost, I poked around to find some good quotes. And I found one by an artist who I love very dearly, long gone by now, Miles Davis. And he said, knowledge is freedom and ignorance is slavery. And straight away, although I love Miles, but I completely disagree with his statement.
Okay.
And I started to think about freedom generally in order to answer your question. I gotta okay, it's the long way around the house. So freedom, as Miles describes it, is actually, I see it completely the opposite, because there is this saying, ignorance is bliss.
Mm-hmm.
And within the music realm, I studied music quite a bit, and I still study music, and I have a bass teacher at the moment. And the more I know, the less I feel free.
Interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'll give you an example. So like I'm a bassist, right? That's my trade. First and foremost, I'm a bassist. So when you're a kid and somebody introduces you to, let's say, a double bass, are you aware of the double bass?
My
Double
sister
bass,
used to play double bass.
beautiful instrument, excellent choice, quite a beast of an instrument. So the double bass has no frets, like a violin. It's fretless. And when you play as a young person, you are really not aware that your intonation might be bad. So you need somebody to guide you towards that.
So as a non-musician
Yeah.
myself, without meaning to mansplain anything, intonation?
Intonation is like, imagine when you relate it to the voice, somebody singing out of tune.
Oh, okay.
So intonation means to sing. Intonation is to be in tune, like singing in tune. whereas like the opposite would be to sing out of tune.
Okay.
So intonation, good intonation means you're playing the instrument in tune. It's a big thing for double bass. And as a young person, you not aware about the sound you're creating so much yet and how well you intonate. So that will come with time. That doesn't mean you don't enjoy the pursuit of trying to play the bass, the double bass. When you grow older, like in my case, I bought a double bass 10 years ago, and I'm playing double bass. I've been an electric bassist for a long time. You play the bass and you're fully aware how bad you sound because you got the capacity of like evaluating what kind of sound you create.
Yeah.
And that is limiting to such a degree that I actually don't play it because I'm aware what kind of work it would need to sound professional on it. And the sound that I hear, the sounds I've heard over decades of listening to music, I can't create on this instrument. So basically, I'm not playing it. So I'm extremely unfree by my knowledge.
Right. So that's really interesting because what I get from that is because you have been playing for so long and you've been learning for so long, your awareness is so broad and maybe acute that you fully understand where you are on the spectrum of skill or anything like that. And your inability to get to play as well as you would like to now hinders your willingness to practice.
Yeah, to get good, if you think about the greats like Ray Brown with Oscar Peterson and Ed Thigpen, great trio, like one of those legendary trios in jazz. When you have that in your head and then you touch the double bass, even though I've been playing the bass since the 80s, you go, wow, I'm so far away. I'm not even gonna pursue it because also it's a matter of time to grow. You have to spend so much time to get better, and I just don't have the time now. So I pursue to be as good as I can on the electric bass, where it has hindered me less because as a young man, I played the electric bass and I made all those same mistakes that a young double bass player might make, but I wasn't aware. I only became aware later. Okay, wow, I don't quite sound as good as I think I am, and then but I kept on working on it. So
And is that because you had the period of time without awareness and had improved during that period of time?
yeah, I mean it's those you know them. I'm sure I always get them wrong. There's like these four stages of
Yeah.
learning, and then and in the end you basically rubbish and not aware. That's the
Yeah.
first stage, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
what's
yeah.
the last one?
Is
That
competent, you are unconsciously competent. So it's unconsciously incompetent, consciously incompetent, consciously competent, and then unconsciously competent. So it's second nature by the time you're
yeah,
brilliant.
and that's kind of you could imagine you'd be free if you had that. And you also, funnily, you probably also free when you're rubbish, but you're not aware of it. It's when you become aware that you're rubbish. It's probably that's quite uncomfortable. So coming back to what Miles said, you said ignorance is slavery. Whew, not sure. So for me, I'm still. It would be so interesting to talk about it as like Charlie Parker or John Coltrane, great saxophonists or in the jazz world, to talk to them about this concept of freedom. If they thought they were truly free towards the end of their career on the instruments, that would be a super interesting conversation because I think me personally, I'm absolutely not free because I've got a construct in my head of what I want to sound like, and I'm constantly chasing that. And I'm aware that I'm not anywhere near it.
Yeah. So where has that come from? That construct of how your sound should be.
Well, listening to the greats.
So you set quite a high bar. There's a reason they're the greats, right?
Well, surely. I mean, you've seen the movie like Amadeus, right?
Mhm.
With Salieri, and he's like, he says something like, "Oh, very religious man." He said, "Oh, thank you, God, for letting me drown in a sea of mediocrity," and Mozart obviously was the genius he admired and ultimately also destroyed as far as the movie is concerned. And yeah, of course, if you want to do something for, no, I wanted to say for living, that's not true. But I think doing something with passion, you wanted to do it the best of your possibilities, abilities. So you compare yourself, and of course you're gonna compare yourself to the best. Imagine you're a tennis player, start to play tennis. I mean, you're not gonna go, yeah, well, there's my coach. I want to be as good as this guy. No, you're gonna like probably. I mean, I'm making this up, but you probably want to watch Wimbledon. Go, who's won Wimbledon more than 20 times? Those are the people you want to be like, right?
Yeah, I get that. And there's part of me that when I was a lot younger, the first thing I felt I was any good at was running. And it was win or it's absolute failure. And as I eventually that became a self-destructive kind of inward self-flagellation kind of trap for me that created or certainly contributed to creating a deep and long period of misery. And it was only when I realized that actually winning didn't matter to me that I freed myself from that turmoil. What you've said there is fascinating though, because you actually use the reference to tennis. Now, I know you love playing badminton. I love it.
Oh yeah.
Even to the point when you very kindly invited me to play, I think I managed to move you about 3 feet in the whole of the hour and a bit we played. And you flogged me like I was being run around and I loved it. I've realized that actually being great at badminton is not very high on my list. I like being run around like a dog, it would appear. But it's interesting because your passion is absolutely unquestionable by me anyway for badminton. But by your own definition, when we talk about badminton, you're a million miles away from the greats of badminton. So if you compared them to the people you would compare your double bass sound to, they're all up there. But badminton exists in this place where you don't seem to mind the gulf.
Yeah, but that's very easy. It's easily explained. That badminton is a recreational sport, like to me. This is what I do for hobby. This is
Okay.
not, I'm not, I'm way too old to turn into professional badminton player. I should have started it a lot earlier. That's what I do for a living.
Okay.
That's a very different thing. And ultimately with badminton, if I win or lose, I don't like losing. Who likes losing? I like to win, but it doesn't. Ultimately, I have other um, parameters how I measure the success of a good badminton training session, and they're very different to like in music.
Mm.
It's a completely different set of how I value what I do.
Okay. That makes absolute sense. And from the given this is my podcast and I can pin you down on things that normally you don't like talking about with your profession,
Mm.
because there's my only experience of professions personally, I hated them. I hated the things I did for a living. I think it's very easy to look at musicians or actors or painters or writers or people who earn their living through a deeply creative process as having this kind of rarefied experience where it's never work. Talk to me about the balance between the passion you have for what you do and this drive for constant improvement. Are you a perfectionist?
Sadly so.
Right. So talk to me about how that balance is, because you're clearly passionate about music
Oh yeah.
and there's this perfectionism and it's your job. And how do you is there a balance that kind of passion and perfectionism and job? I've never experienced it.
Oh, I absolutely not. And I guess in some respect, it's not even desirable to have a balance because if you think about, I gotta talk about this thing about art, being an artist and a musician. And first of all, as an artist, if you find the perfect balance, there's probably something not quite right, because part of being an artist is probably to express the turmoil. So, and then it's a question of how one views him or herself. So for me, a musician, let's start with the musician. The musician can be a utility. You're a musician in a symphony orchestra, let's say on trumpet. You have to practice, and you gotta be the best, because you're gonna be so exposed in the orchestra, and you like a tool in a bigger machinery. So you like this cog in a machinery, and quite an important one as a trumpet player. So you have to work on your embouchure. You gotta practice. You can't just like take a day off. No, not if you want to keep your gig at a symphony orchestra. So this is a musician who is a practitioner, and there's proficiency, and you gotta be really good in what you do, and you gotta strive for the absolute best at all time. An artist is a different beast altogether. And of course, if you Venn diagram, of course, there's musicians, artists, and there's crossover. But some musicians are clearly, hey, I want to play my instrument, and this is what I do, and I want to be really good at that. And on the other side, artists, they sometimes don't care at all about proficiency on instrument. It's not necessary. You could be quite a fun, to a certain extent, artistic trumpet player without having the sort of high bar of being an amazing trumpet player, because you want to create art with an instrument. And you get that a lot. I know I'm stereotyping here, but singer-songwriters often use their guitar playing as a scratch pad for expressing their thoughts, creating the universe with lyrics. So that they only know three chords, perhaps, again, it's just stereotyping here, but just to make it simple. So you can write great songs with three chords if you know three chords on your guitar, and you pick up the guitar whenever you see one, and then sing your songs and create this sort of universe, a lyrical universe. That's fine. That's very different to like a practitioner in music.
Yeah.
Because that is more like an artist, and that's how also the industry works. You have like an artist, and often the artist is not that proficient, on an instrument. So they're hiring in a producer, and musicians like the trumpet player who really know what they're doing, right? So having said all that, coming back to me, and I've always kind of like moved around between these two. Sometimes I have more like an artistic phase in my period, where it's more about writing music, putting things together the way I see them fit. And my bass playing becomes very just a supportive thing. I'm not going to put myself forward as the bass player, because I'm playing a functional role to support my art as an artist. And then other times I've also played for other people, and even for myself, then my bass playing becomes the thing that I want to put in the center. And then I need to practice, and I need to get better, and I want to put that in the center. And then all these, like I mentioned Ray Brown earlier on, then Ray Brown becomes terribly important, because I listen to Ray Brown and go, oh my God, if I want to go anywhere near that, I'll never make that. He was a double bassist to start out with, but that's like, he's one of the greats. And then he becomes much more important to me, and many others, of course, than when I'm having the artist head on. Because when I have the artist head on, I want to kind of have a different vision. So proficiency, virtuosity, technical ability, these things, they become secondary.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes any.
I think it does make sense, because what I've, or at least what I've taken from that is, if you are going to be a musician, professional musician, earning your money, being hired to deliver something quite specific, excellence in your particular instrument, then technical ability, you have to be at the very top. An artist can create their own version. Whatever they're creating is their own version. So the creativity is the primary driver, and the technical excellence, as you said, you step back from being a bass player a bit in that, because your broader vision is what you're bringing into reality.
Yeah. Wow, that's wonderfully said. Hey, you should have a podcast. You're good at this. What a clever man.
Thanks.
And I mean it. I know I'm
It
smiling,
sounds
but it's
super
true.
sarcastic
You
as
know,
well.
and no, I know, but no, it's not. It's actually, I mean it. And because of that, interestingly enough, you summarized it really well, a lot better than I did with my waffle. But I have hired people to produce me when I wanted to be more upfront as a bassist. Because when I do my own music, the bass is like the last thing I think of. And if I want to do something where the bass is more centerpiece, I have had other people to produce me to actually focus on that because naturally I don't tend to that.
Interesting.
To go like, yeah, in one of there's one album, it's a fantastic album a friend of mine produced. I've known him for a long time, and he really focused on me, and it was like almost felt like uncomfortable. But this is like one of the most beloved records that I've recorded. Is nearly 10 years old now, but that is an album that really speaks to people. And you go, hold on a minute. If this is an album that speaks to people, why don't you do more of it? But I actually, the long and the short of it is, I can't without the help, because if I can't do it myself, I can't put myself in that role naturally. I have tried, and it's like it's not the same. I need somebody else to go, hey, Steph, you should do that. If it's about my bass playing,
That's right. What's the name of the album?
it's called Dr. Hypenstein.
So, in case it wasn't clear in the intro, Stefan, amongst all his amazing work labels, has his own band, which goes by the name of Redtenbacher's Funkestra and Dr. Hypenstein.
Hypenstein, yeah.
Hypenstein.
Mhm.
Dr. Hypenstein was released in 2015, and it's for me, there was this lovely moment last summer when Stefan, my wife and I were in Stefan and his wife's garden having drinks because we live on the same road now. I knew he was a musician. We were sat having a conversation, and his wife mentioned Dr. Hypenstein, and it kind of went past me. But I thought, oh, what? I know that song, and it was only after I found it on my Apple Music and played it that you went, yeah, yeah, that's me. And so I have been listening to Stefan without knowing since probably about 2016. And then 2 years ago, we met, and the kind of kismet and happenstance is remarkable. So I recommend going and getting straight onto streaming services and listening to Dr. Hypenstein,
Yes.
because it is super funky. So when I say that this episode has got funk in it, this is the man who brings it. With everything you've said, you talk about in your career, there are times when you focused on being the musician, and there are times when you focused on being the artist. What dictates where you are? Dictates the wrong word, but what's the flow of that drive or desire in you?
Oh gosh. Um, are we still relating to the topic? I hope we do.
Yeah, 100% we are.
Okay.
In my mind,
Oh, great.
anyway.
And by the way, I didn't pay him for this sort of shameless plug of the album. I'm trying to not like plug anything because we're here to talk about the intellectual concept, which I'm quite keen about. But thank you. By the way, I found this equally embarrassing that happened with Hypenstein, and I found it also beautiful. I think it's fantastic that because you don't know, you're putting art out in the world, you don't know what's going to happen, and that bit. I found beautiful that it meant something to you, and then we meet, and that I love that. That's I sincerely love that. And in answer to your question, why I'm sometimes more inclined to follow artistic endeavors versus going out there as a musician, I think at the beginning um, of my career, I think a good uh, a good reason would have been commercial considerations.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody know it's hard to make a living as an artist. And if you are a musician with skills, you can hire your skills out. You can go, hey, I'm a bassist, I can do things. And then I go out and give you service. I'm good at what I do. And we're exchanging funds for that. And that is I'm hiring out as myself as a utility. And I think what happened over time is that I realized although I have the proficiency to do it, it's often didn't make me very happy because I'm very opinionated, and I have my thoughts, and I never quite understood when you sit in an ensemble or a band, an orchestra for an artist, and you have all the people that are working musicians, as the term goes, and something goes down which is like not musical. But it's not the musician's job to pipe up and go, hey, there's something going on, because it's either the musical director or the producer or the artist who have to say. So the musicians, it's this sort of unwritten law. You don't say because you hired to be like a utility here.
What do you mean by something going on?
Oh, for example, if there is like somebody says, "Hey, how should we end this song?" And then the artist says, "I have an idea. We should end it like that." And the professional musicians go, "That's a terrible idea. That's actually a rubbish idea," but nobody will pipe up. And because it's not their role, they're professional. They're not saying that this is not a good idea.
So they're
Like
told to do something, they're there, just do what you're told.
yeah, I mean, there's always amount of subjectivity in decisions like that, but there's sometimes decisions that are kind of broadly bad. They're musically, you go like, that's actually not, that doesn't sound good, and everybody knows it, but nobody would say. And then it would normally be me, always like kind of ultimately, I'm only answering to the gods of music. I would have to say something, and then I was either often fired because I'm there to play bass and not there to cast opinion on their vision of what the music should be like. Or people go, hey, you guy, you with the yellow glasses, you have a lot of ideas. Why don't you become the new MD or band leader? Why don't you do it? That happened quite frequently. That I ended up as being the band leader, or um, the MD, or the producer as I'm now, and I never saw myself in that role. I never said, oh, I want to be the band leader, I want to be the producer. It's just it always seems, it's almost like it always came back to me the same way. Like it circled around without me wanting to be that guy, but it comes out because I just can't. So I can't keep myself down. When I feel something is really not right, I just gotta say something.
And has that always been the case?
No, certainly not. Because as a younger person, as a younger man, you just uh, I don't know. This is a generalization. Anyway, I can only speak for myself here, but you don't have the confidence. You just notice, you watch and notice, and then, but you don't have the confidence to go, particularly when maybe the musicians are old and go, hey guys, I know you're all like 10 years older than I am, and I only played bass for 3 years, but you don't do that. You kind of grow into it. And at one point you just have to embrace who you are. And I think coming back to freedom, that is something I'd say about freedom when you start to act and behave in accordance to what you really are. There is freedom in that. There's definitely freedom in that. And as I grow older, and this probably happens to most people when they grow older, you become more comfortable in your own skin, and you also accept all the things that you don't like about yourself, and you're more embracing of that.
Yeah, see, that's really, we've had a version of this conversation before, and I noted down, you said you just have to embrace who you are. And what you've just said is as you get older, that what I took from what you said was it's almost like a natural process. You become more comfortable with who you are. I'm I'm not 100% sure that's true. Certainly not true for everybody. I think there are lots and lots of people who never get to a point where they have explored who they are, first and foremost. You spoke about when we're younger, we sort of conform to we lack the confidence to stand our ground and go, this just doesn't feel right. Or so we conform to this situation we're in. In a plug for the forthcoming book that I've written, there are these inclusion criteria in every group we're part of. When we're young, we compromise our truth because it doesn't feel safe to voice it. For you, was there a period where you actively went looking for who you were, or was it did it just come naturally that the compromising just fell away?
No, I think I did. I've never had sort of the sit down thing. I think it was all a process. But I also want to say to that is it's something about what I define for myself, rightly and wrongly, for like natural magnetism, that ultimately, no matter who you think you are or wanna be, or who think you don't are, there's a natural magnetism, and eventually it will come through who you truly are, no matter what you're trying to do intellectually. I think you kind of you will, if it's a boat, and you think, hey, I should sit at the rudder, for example, and you think that of yourself, or your parents have told you that, or your environment is like, you're the guy on the rudder. But if you keep on doing that, and you shouldn't be the guy on the rudder, because maybe you should be the guy like who sits on the side or on the front, and eventually actually that's where you normally end up. I mean, I know it sounds a bit voodoo, but I do believe in that, because I don't think you can bend yourself out of who you truly are, and I do not believe you can be anything you want to be. I like it as a sort of motivational sort of impetus. You can be what you want to be, but hey, if I think it would be quite good early on, and that's quite a broad stroke, in education, to help people to find out as quickly as they can what they could be, and what they certainly cannot be.
Mm.
And there is that, because sometimes people follow this so, like, I call it praying to the false gods, although I'm not religious, but praying to the false gods. You have certain ideas what you think you should be, but you haven't clocked it that you're actually not, and you're constantly running against what you can't be, but you think you should be it. And eventually, I think this natural magnetism I'm talking about, it will come to you and get
Mm.
you, and will like put you straight.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I think we're culturally or societally conditioned to look at the things we do and really try to aspire to doing certain things. And I think everything we do, whatever it might be, is a mechanism in service to something deeper, that deeper truth of ours, the soul, however you want to describe it. And so fixating on the actual thing isn't necessarily going to be in service to your deeper meaning, but we don't spend any time teaching kids to connect to their deepest self. We condition them in school to all sorts of different things. And I agree. I think the midlife crisis, the archetypal midlife crisis, is our deepest truth, breaking us down when we've lived a life that isn't true to it.
Wow, yeah, gosh. We had this conversation with the band, was it yesterday? Played a concert, and we talked about midlife crisis, and somebody said, hey, we're already, this is not a midlife crisis, because we're beyond it. Men in
Yeah.
the mid 50s, they're already, that's gone beyond midlife crisis. I don't know. So midlife crisis, just out of interest, how do you view it in terms of an age group?
Yeah. So I think when I use the term midlife crisis, it's just to put people in the mindset of this is where people's lives divert quite dramatically in one way or another. I think we're getting to a point where people are having that sooner and later. So the age range of midlife crises is now people in their 20s are having these kind of existential crises, and people in their 60s and 70s are realizing it isn't too late to completely change and kind of be who they are. Um, so really, that midlife piece is a misnomer now. Um, but it did happen to me, I guess, around 40, that it was like, shit, I can't do this anymore. I have to start listening a bit more deeply to who I am. Because you're absolutely right. My experience was you can resist it and resist it and resist it, but your truth, your inner voice is going to get louder the longer you resist it.
Oh wow, that would like feed my theory about the magnet,
Yeah, I
whatever
think
that
so.
is.
Yeah.
I think energetically there is something there that like we kind of like, yeah, you're drawn to what you should be in. And I'm just thinking it because there's one, my wife Stephanie and I, we have a little bit of a penchant for this philosopher Schopenhauer, who's quite a dark dude. He said some, there's some darkness, and we like him a lot probably because we're dog lovers, and he had like a lovely dog called Atma. Many, like he had a few dogs, he all called them Atma. But see, like he wrote this essay, and I looked this up because I thought it was interesting about free will, right? And he's a classic. He talks about what I'm saying about magnetism, it just occurs to me. He talks about that we have actually absolutely no free will. All we do is responding to stimuli and causes without any, we don't have a say in that. And when I read it, I was kind of, wow, I really don't like that. It's very negative. But now having talked about magnetism, I just like, I found myself thinking, wow, this is kind of going down the same lane.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it then,
I mean, it's this extreme form of that, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. But it brings to mind what forms that the particular vibrational polarity of your magnet and my magnet and anybody else. It's not choice or free will, or if it is choice, and I haven't spent a great deal of time thinking about free will, but if it is choice, we start masking all of that as a kid. So as a kid, when we don't know anything, we're not choosing anything. Fascinating.
Well, it's certainly fascinating, that's for sure. Pardon, yeah.
No. I was going to say I don't have any kind of conclusion on any of that.
No, I mean, I just like, as you invited me to this podcast, I was just like looking like for nice quotes like the one by Miles Davis, which I already quoted, and some other people. And then I looked around, and it's like when you get into it, oh my God, it's such a huge subject, and it's certainly not conclusive because you can get like, oh my God, you can keep on going. You can make this your life's work, talking about freedom and what it means and free will. They're somewhat connected. Coming back to Schopenhauer, he had very interesting things to say in this essay. And he was talking about three types. And you were wrong, I like it. He talked about physical freedom. Stephanie might mention that, my wife, because she's into that, kind of physical freedom. She could relate to that. And then two other things. One was intellectual freedom, and the other one was moral freedom. And the one I want to like bring into this conversation is moral freedom, because I said to my wife, I said, see, that's why I'm getting unstuck a little bit with religion, because I grew up Catholic, and I'm not a religious man now. I would say I'm a spiritual man, but not a religious man. And I started to think, wow, if everybody would have true moral freedom, that would be bad. That would be bad if we would be free from morals, if you had free, like total freedom from morals. And I go, oh my God, am I talking now? Am I actually advocating that the church with all its dogma, no matter what religion it is, actually a good thing to not set people morally free? Because when I'm thinking about myself, questioning my actions, a lot of things I do, they're within a framework of the way I grew up, religious Catholic upbringing. There's a framework, and that framework I always resented as an intellectual because it's not truly free. And now as I grow older, I go, wow, if we remove frameworks altogether, moral frameworks, it would be Armageddon. And well, we see some of this stuff right now, but isn't that interesting that I promote as like artists, if I'm putting myself in the artist role, traditional are typecast as liberal and atheists and against dogma, the basically anti-status quo. And then I found myself with this Schopenhauer uh, uh, quote on moral freedom. And I go, wow, if you remove all morals and institutions that actually instill some, which maybe goes flat against what I just said, the magnetism. No, it doesn't quite. Then it would be bad.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because it assumes that as creatures, as a species, as an animal, we don't innately, or we wouldn't innately behave in a way that we can sit here with our intellectual minds and kind of go, oh, that's a very moral behavior. And the argument is almost like, as I hear it, is, well, if we took away the taught morals, it would be Armageddon. We'd dissolve into this pretty destructive, supposedly with morals. My sense of it is we are very intelligent animals. And if you look at nature, we are part of nature, although we've been separated from it. If you look at nature, then define an animal that, or think of an animal that behaves in a way that we would think of moral free if we did. Species to species, they take care of themselves, they take care of each other, maybe they fight, yeah, for territory or ground. Very rarely in nature do they fight to the death. They do, but it's much more likely they'll fight for dominance. And I wonder whether it's, and the other thing that always occurs to me is that we tie morals to religion. And if you look at the religions, they're however many thousands of years old, depending on which particular religion you choose to follow. As a species, we are hundreds of times older than that, or certainly tens of times older than that. And there is fossil evidence of our ancient lineage with mended broken bones. Now, the theory being that you wouldn't survive. If it takes 6 weeks for a bone to mend, you would have to be taken care of in order for you to eat, to stay warm, to stay hydrated, and that is way before religion comes in from a moralistic perspective, teaching us morals. So innate to us is to take care of each other, potentially. So the idea of the magnetism, I think to me anyway, that attracts me, pun intended, much more than religion gives us morals.
That is, I think I can completely go with you, because it's fascinating to me to realize that when I just see the word moral, I have like a religious connotation, because it reminds me of, and I haven't thought about it at all, it's not prefabricated, but when I was a younger man, when I was a student, I wrote a book by, I think it's a Sigmund Freud book. It's called Totem and Taboo. And he started, supposedly, I don't know what exactly he did, but he started like tribes, African tribes. I can't recall which countries, but he just put it as, he's done some research into African tribes who don't have, obviously, Christianity. They have like other types of religion, more natural nature religions. I don't know how you describe that. And he said that he talked about, there was always sort of like a sexual connotation in Freud's work, right? And he talked about that in all the tribes he's researched. I don't know how he did it. He said that incest was taboo, although it wasn't a law, but it was generally considered to be, that's not what you do. Innately, that's not what you do. Which would, I don't know what I'm thinking about there right now, but which would give, like, it would bolster your argument that without, a religion as we know, like Christianity, like our framework, I guess, there are things you do and don't. You take care of each other, and you don't diminish your gene pool naturally.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's gotta think about it.
Yeah.
Morals, and I'm thinking about religion first. Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. It's fascinating. So with this podcast, I really only have 3 questions.
How many have you asked already?
We've done the first.
Oh God.
Which is, what does freedom mean to you?
People go have a cup of coffee,
No,
hit pause, come back. Or if you're in the car, petrol station,
Yeah.
little
Quick pee stop.
Yeah.
Second question is, what is something you consistently find yourself having to free yourself from?
Wow. What you saying, what you consistently free yourself from. Um, I'm thinking what I constantly like to free myself from constantly.
Hmm.
That's like
Yeah.
that would be more like it.
Yeah. Go on then.
Well, but like I keep it to music for a moment. Um, uh, when I'm really into playing jazz at the moment with a lot of improvisation, and this is very music related. But I'm trying to free myself from the same old vocabulary that I keep on coming back to, and I practice at home. And I go, I'm not gonna play the same old vocabulary that I taught myself over decades, and I can manage to a certain extent at home. But when I then go in a club or a concert hall, I'm absolutely not free of this language. I have to practice more to free myself from playing, or if music is like words, from saying words I don't want to say.
Mm.
It's probably not a very satisfying answer in terms of like the general topic, but for a musician, a practitioner like I am, probably a very specific answer.
Yeah. But equally, why is that, do you think? That there are times in your house, at home on your own, where you can free yourself from, as you put it, the language of improvisation. What changes when you're in front of an audience that robs you of that freedom?
Wow, there's a lot to that. I think discussed it with a friend of mine, a jazz guitarist, that when you practice jazz, I mean, like the short answer to your question, if this would be like a music related podcast that say, well, you need more practice, basically, so it seeps in deeper, your vocabulary seeps in deeper, so you can have it, at the ready in whatever circumstance. That would be the simple answer.
Yeah.
Just practice more, right? However, playing music, which is not dissimilar to telling a story. Um, when you practice, it's very isolated. You having basically a chat with yourself in the mirror. The minute you step in front of another musician, just a second musician, or maybe just three musicians, that changes the dynamic of what you want to say and how you say it. And then put like a crowd in front of you, 50 people, 500 people, 5,000 people. There's energy, and it will feed back to what you think you can or want to say. And I put it simply back to energy. So energy seems quite a topic here, isn't it?
Hmm.
Magnetism, energy. But I do, yeah, this is just how I perceive the world. This is really how I feel it works.
Okay. So you say it changes the energy, which can affect what you want to say. Is that then so? Let me formulate this question. Is it that you're changing what you want to say, and therefore what you want to say is the language that you are most comfortable with? Or is there still something else you would like to say that isn't the language you're most familiar with, but you still don't or can't in that space?
Well, I said actually yes to both. Coming back to the mouse chord, I mean, if I'm in front of a crowd and with my peers, there's things I want to say and I can't because I don't have the ability yet. I'm
Okay.
limited. I'm limited to what I think I should do and what I can do. And the other thing is, it's just what I say, play, same to
Mm-hmm.
me, is changing in front of a crowd. That's also a prison because that comes back to being probably needy. And the question is, are all performers or artists needy of a positive response from their audience?
Right.
And that's a prison. And some artists are so gorgeously on the surface not interested in the response, and
Mm.
that's freedom, isn't it? When you go, yeah, you're thinking I'm completely a gone loon, but yet you find what I do fascinating because I'm free of the conventions I'm acting in accordance to my own value system, and I freed myself from the response. And it would be truly freedom to do not care at all what other people think of your music or art. And it's that always revolves to my thing. It's a tricky. There's a fantastic jazz guitarist called Pat Metheny, and he was interviewed on BBC, and they talked about his obsession playing the guitar and practicing writing songs. And he said, if I be the last person on the planet, there would be nobody being able to listen to my music anymore. Insert, I do get that you might want to practice guitar because it's a nice pastime, but he said specifically he would continue to write music. He would compose music. He would write tunes and writing down, and here's tunes written down. And you ask yourself, why would you do that if there's nobody that you could share that with anymore, or like trying to, change something with your composition? But and that's I thought it was fascinating that he seemed to have freed himself from it's purely an internal process. But I think a lot of artists, they don't have that. They're doing what they're doing, and they want the applause, they want the reaction of a crowd. And in that, I think they are also, that sounds really negative, but they're truly unfree. And coming back to my own playing, I go, I'm playing, and then there's a conversation with myself and go, why have I played this? What am I doing? Is this, I'm trying to showboat to get a reaction? Why am I not playing what I know is beautiful and musical?
It's really interesting because it to me it talks to the mechanism versus the meaning, and that it isn't that. Sorry, I didn't. The name of the guitarist who the documentary was about, he said he would keep playing.
Pat Metheny, yeah.
Pat Metheny. For him, the deeper meaning is not the audience reaction, but that doesn't negate the value of the deeper meaning being touching another human being through music. And it doesn't, I don't think, I absolutely, I get what you're saying. And maybe it's because music is not my realm professionally. It's easier for me to distance or reflect on it in a slightly different way, because in one aspect, it is external validation, could be considered to be external validation. But actually, when you're talking about it and you put it into the world of music, is it? Or is it actually, the deeper meaning to me is to touch somebody else emotionally through my skill and my passion and my artistry and my whatever it might be. Therefore, if my intention is to touch them positively, sounds a bit weird, but if it is to touch them positively, then it's okay to do what they want me to do.
See,
does
but
that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But here you have to ask yourself, what are you wanting to touch and positively to get a lift up yourself? Are you doing this for selfish reasons?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's probably discussed many times, and there's lots of clever things written about it. But I'm going completely cliche here, but recently some stories have come out about Mother Teresa, right?
Right.
In Calcutta, like doing the work she's done, and as it turned out, she was quite a force of nature, and she was, or some people that have worked with her, maybe it was false information, I don't know, but it sounded like she was pretty she had a vision of how she is portrayed and what she wants to do, and she would do like most things to succeed in her objectives. And some of the things she's done to succeed in her objectives was completely different to what she's like portrayed as a selfless person helping other people.
Yeah.
And you ask yourself, okay, if a person that helps other people on a significant scale, actually ultimately, I'm just making an assumption, doing it for themselves, does it negate that they're actually helping other people on a massive scale, even though they might be completely selfless, sorry, the opposite of selfless, selfish narcissists, and they're defining themselves by helping other people, but they don't care about other people. They're just doing it for themselves, but the outcome is just the same.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not saying that Mother Teresa
Yeah.
did it all. I just took this as a little train of thoughts, you know.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because I can't remember the word it's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember exactly that. The kind of selfless. There are no selfless acts.
Oh,
Is one argument, because in the delivery of a selfless act, we serve some part of ourselves. So there cannot be selflessness
interesting.
is one argument.
And what's another one?
No, actually, that's the one I believe in.
Yeah, you believe in that?
Yeah, I think so. But because
it makes sense though, because if you're talking about, morals away from religion, if you have, okay, reductionist again, don't know enough about it. You have a small tribe, and you helping somebody who needs the help. Because this person has a type of skill set that you need for your tribe to work, you will help and you will look like a helpful person because you are helping, but you're doing it for sort of like a different objective.
Yeah.
Like away from, and maybe, maybe it's like, maybe it's our privilege to talk about that here in your lovely home. And because the outcome probably can override it. I mean, if somebody helped thousands, hundreds of thousands people to have food and shelter and safety, I mean, if they've done it like very selfishly for themselves and have harmed nobody else with it rather than help them, hey, maybe that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's that classic. The way we help ourselves is by helping others. You give it away and it comes back multiple fold. And whilst that might not be the point, front and center in your mind that, well, I'm going to get this back, so it's fine. It might be, actually, I want to help. There is a sense of well-being created in helping other people.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I came home the other night after this concert, I said, and there was somebody broke down. I think it was one of my neighbors, one of our neighbors actually, but he didn't recognize me. He broke down on the bridge, and I slowed down, and he was on the phone, and I slowed down and wrote down, put down my mimic. Do you want me to help you? Do you need any help? And he said, no help is coming. Thank you so much. And then I drove off, and that was probably one of those moments I couldn't have seen. I can't see in that instant how I would have been helped in any way. I felt bad. Like in the middle of the night, he like in the middle of the bridge, he broke down, know. So and anyway, it just came to mind because probably neighbors. That was the theme in my brain box, I think.
Yeah. Fascinating.
But like I picked one arbitrary thing that came to mind as an answer to your question. There's probably other answers I could give, in other fields. But I think I sail close to music at the moment, because also thinking back when you asked me, hey, what have I forgotten, when you very nicely have looked at my website and you found all these labels, and there's like you could encompass them all. Yeah, but this guy's a musician, and I am a musician. But I think all these labels, they're just different arms, branches of my personality. And I think my personality is like sort of, I guess I'm fascinated by creativity and imagination, and that's my trunk. And that's when you mentioned software developer. Yeah, that took 10 years out of my life roughly. That came from an interest in creativity, and being a producer is creative, and being a musician is creative, and academia is creative and interesting. So that's kind of, I think that's, I'm not sure if there's a job description for a guy like that. It's just what always comes back to me, that I'm a bass player, I'm a musician. That's kind of like sort of that's part of the main trunk, but ultimately the main trunk is just the curiosity and the creativity and connectivity. I mean, the bass in music is the one instrument that connects everything. It connects melody and harmony and rhythm. And I didn't know when I picked up the bass. That's why I was fascinated by the bass. People played all sorts of instruments around me, but I wanted the bass because I just loved the feeling of it. Not quite understanding, cognitively understanding that this is the instrument of cohesion. And over time, I realized that's why it's my instrument, because like I'm interested in all these things I said I'm interested in, and I'm interested in connecting people, things, and creating cohesion. So the instrument is just an extension of my want.
Yeah, it's the mechanism
Yeah,
in music that you serve your deeper meaning through.
yeah, totally. I could never be a flautist. That just wouldn't work for me.
Yeah. I'm increasingly liking that first question more and more, is like what's missing, because you said it, they're labels. And labels are shortcuts very often that stop us having to think. So you say you're a bassist, go, he plays the bass, cool. Composer, okay, he writes music, cool. Whereas actually you're creative and interested in innovation and improvisation and connectedness and connection of people and things. Well, that takes a lot more thinking about than, oh, he's a dude who's got a band.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, that's also like when we're thinking about writing a resume or a CV about ourselves. I mean, apparently the knowledge is you write it according to who you want to, appeal to.
Yeah.
And I found myself doing this a lot. And it's interesting with this podcast because I have been on a few musical podcasts, and James, my partner, from the studio partner or production partner where we're creating a lot of music, we have a podcast ourselves, so it's very music related. So we will come from a certain angle, because coming from a certain angle gives you authority and people taking you seriously within that field. If I speak for a bass podcast, of course I will put on my bass guitarist hat and present myself in a way that makes me hopefully sound and look like a professional. Your podcast, it's a very, I don't know who is going to listen to this, so I'm not sure how I should present myself, but I normally like pull that label out, and then I can go with that label. If I'm now going to a developer conference, then I will have a very different approach, because I'm trying to kind of find cohesion in that group of people. So like a general thing is like, oh, you all these things. It's like, yeah, that's good, and you probably missed a few, or maybe it's too many, I don't know. But the how you present yourself has so much to do with who you presenting yourself to. And that's why this podcast is interesting for me, because I have no idea who would take an interest not in what you have to say, because what you have to say is very interesting and very intellectually stimulating, but I don't know what anybody will get out of what I have to say, because like I'm, if I want to reduce myself again, hey, I'm just a muso, as you said, like, hey, I play bass in a band, and it's so interesting because when you say things, oh, what do you do? I play bass. Oh, you in a band? Are you in a band? What kind of music do you play? But before that, have you played with anybody famous? And I get very easily bored with this question, with questions like that. So sometimes I'm deliberately like awkward about answering the question. I like people who have in the olden days. I mean, still people do it now, but when they gave you a business card, which was really like weird, like lover of the arts or free spirit. Normally you get, oh yeah, here's like
Accountant.
yeah, sorry. What?
No offense to accountants.
No, this accountants
They're
always
very
get
necessary.
Accountants always get in the neck. Accountants are great. I've got great accountants right now. And then here's me local, so they're awesome. Shout out to you. But I also thought accountants. But and I was always fascinated by that, the non-boxy nature.
Yeah.
But not as a general rule, because some people are great polo players.
Yeah.
So it says polo player on it. For me, I think I've always been somewhat as a mavericky intellectual who happens to choose my main one is probably music, and if or bass.
Yeah.
But I always find it a bit limiting, because then when you have conversations, you get immediately you get sort of roped in with a stereotype.
Yeah.
oh, you're musicians, oh, you get up late, oh, musicians, you take drugs, oh, you drink a lot, and all these sort of reductionist things, which I'm generally trying to always stay clear. Even myself, if I talk to people, I normally, it's probably one of the last things I'm going to ask them, if at all, what they do for a
Yeah.
living. I normally approach people and I want to kind of create an open forum to them telling me where their thoughts are,
Yeah.
what's burning on your fingernails right now. And when you meet someone, let's say somebody just had a child, and woman, and you go, hey, what do you do for a living? And they go, oh, and
Yeah.
then it's almost like, you're reducing the person to a function
Yeah.
and you're squeezing out for what they might have to say.
Yeah.
So I always, it's a general point about how I guess I operate. I like to have it open.
Mm.
I like to have it open or narrow down, because when you narrow down, stereotypes come in fast and furiously, and I always dislike that tremendously, I have to say.
Yeah. It's certainly my experience of you is exactly that. That even I genuinely, my perspective of you as a musician was, it was only when we had that question, you mentioned that album, that it was like, oh shit, okay, right. Because the conversations we'd had, I was interested in you and what you had to say, not the fact that you play bass or you're a composer or anything like that. And I think you said you're not sure why anybody would be interested in what you have to say, or what aspect of yourself to kind of bring. Well, this is a podcast called Hands Up If You're Human, and it's that I'm interested in the people, the core of the person amongst all the labels, and I think for me anyway, I wanted you on because that my experience of you is that's your natural approach, is curiosity and openness and inquisitiveness, and not tying people to their labels, which I think a great many people, their identities are tied so closely to the labels and the functions they perform, that they have never been taught and have lost the connection with who they really are.
Yeah, which I think is sad. Which you said, I had a great mentor called, his real name, John Smith, and he delivered a program at a music academy I used to work at. It was sort of a PGC program for teachers. I think it was in contemporary music performance, and I became quite good friends with him, and he had this sort of he came with this construct to many of our classes about the possible self, and I always loved that, because the possible self is to uh, not hang your hat on this one
Mm.
coat hanger, notwithstanding that you can live happily alongside my theory about natural magnetism.
Yeah.
And maybe it's also like always kind of, maybe it's a kind of like a fact check for yourself. Is my hat hanging on the right hanger?
Yeah.
It's just like feel it out and try to be true to yourself. And obviously this is an intellectual podcast. I mean, the one thing, we don't have to go there at all, but the luxury we have talking about this freedom, and we talk about we talk about moral freedom, intellectual freedom, to an extent physical freedom. Stephanie will have My wife will have more to say about that, I'm assuming. But all this is it's almost like a no, it's not almost, it's a luxury, and it's
Mm.
allowed, that we can talk about this thing, that in our society as it is right now. That's also freedom.
Yeah.
There are, and that, you notice anyone, other people have mentioned for sure, because other people, the conversation we have, and it's just like, you can't have this conversation,
Yeah.
not a public conversation, and you might not even have it in private because it's not safe, so that we can go inwards, is a luxury, that we are like, we have the luxury that we can think, oh, hey, what's going on, also possible selves, who we possibly could be, natural magnetism. There's billions of people in the world where that's not even an option, even if they're totally aware of it.
Yeah.
Of course, you could argue, um, there is some interesting evidence of that it's a sad chapter of humankind when people have written, Holocaust survivors have written about the experiences, and some Holocaust survivors they have never recovered from what they have experienced. Somebody like Primo Levi, who's written like really harrowing books, and eventually was just it got too dark for him, and he couldn't get over it, and he died very young. And there's other people who have written about it, and people ask themselves, how is this person still alive? How have they managed to go through the ordeal, torture and death and all these negative things? And they have managed by somehow finding freedom in their head from what's happening to them, no matter how bad it was. And I always I that flows me, the thought that like the mental strength of people to go to that stage, that even the worst things, they have kind of, they in their mind freed themselves from what's actually happening in the physical world. I mean, I find this in the power of that. And the question arises, is that something that we all could learn, or is it something that has to be innate in a person to be able to do that?
Well, Viktor Frankl is the very famous Man's Search for Meaning, inspired and kind of his philosophies created during his time in concentration camps. So it is an absolute privilege to be in a position, if I take my own adventure, to be in a position where I was able to walk away from what I used to do, and there's still a roof over my head. There's still food on the table. There's warmth in the winter. There's clothes on my back. If any of those things were under threat, I would still be doing what I was doing, or it would be a very different situation. So I'm very aware and very grateful for my privilege, almost entirely unearned. So yeah, it's a really interesting, but I think I think in part recognizing that can help in a humbling way to, I mean, it could be construed that this is taking ourselves quite seriously because of the intellectual nature of the conversations. But I think there's a humility and a humbleness that comes with it, because ultimately it's not life and death. Although, is it?
Well, to some people, it certainly is. I always think about the privilege of our upbringing. So generally, Western world, last few decades, I always think, that it is a duty of mine to exercise my mind because I have been given the opportunity. So I don't want to flaunt that at all. My parents, like yours, probably similar, post-war generation, second one, the last one, and and their parents, our grandparents, have given a lot. And I always felt like that I was able to go to school, business school, and study and university. A lot of has happened before me for me to give myself the opportunity. That's why I was always really like, I owe it to the people, my parents and my grandparents and people who came before me, to exercise my brain. I must do it because I've been awarded the opportunity.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of also, maybe I'm lying to myself, but that's how I'm going to make myself feel okay about what it is I do. So
Fascinating. Stefan, I am conscious of your time and our listeners' time.
but there's a third question.
There is a third question. What are you creating freedom to?
What I'm creating freedom to. Wow. You thought about these questions, haven't you?
Freedom from and freedom to are really important to me.
Wow. I think what I aspire to, and I think can never happen, is like what I would consider true freedom, like true freedom, like all the things I mentioned, all the small things in music and otherwise. If I truly could free myself from all these constructs, it would be wonderful. And I think it can be happen. It can happen. It's like I think my mind is probably too small and feeble to actually free myself from so many things
Mm.
that I'd like to free myself from. However, I can step closer to it by embracing that knowledge because ultimately I think I can't, it
Yeah.
would be great, it's like this sort of, the song's written about it, of course, free yourself. It would be awesome. Like in the 60s, hey, they thought they freed themselves with taking a lot of psychedelia and drugs,
Yeah.
but that's not the way. That's just a band-aid. That's not reality. So I think also coming back to Schopenhauer, there is a sort of there is a framework which you can't escape. And I think I'll probably die with my principal, with some of my principal intellectual and emotional prisons intact.
Yeah.
I think that won't change. It's hard to embrace that, to go, well, some of these innate things that I'd like to kind of free myself from. And I only mentioned the one particularly, like about the performance in public versus practicing in private. But I think the key step is the step to more freedom than less freedom is embracing the limits
So good.
of what's possible.
Yeah, so good. I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago on non-dualism, so that we're all this single divine consciousness having a human experience. And there was one, I don't know who it was, but they were talking about a lot of the teachings they've seen and experienced on non-dualism looks to elevate us above the human experience. But we're trying to do that from having it, being a human being and having a human experience. So we're negating a fundamental of our experience, which is I'm approaching this as a carbon suited whatever. And it's only by recognizing that, only by embracing the innate limits imposed on us by this body and limits of our mind and all those kind of things, that we can progress as far as possible into the understanding or into peace or into freedom or whatever it might be. It requires us to understand the limit, to recognize and acknowledge the limits, because we're human beings.
Yeah. And I think that's a stepping stone, like in a really super broad sense, to kind of elevate from Homo sapiens to Homo Illuminati.
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely going to have to be a further conversation on this. I am very conscious of time. So I have one further question and then I will wrap up. What is something somebody can do if they are feeling trapped, lost, in need of more freedom?
Wow. That's
Apart from stream Redtenbacher's Funkestra on Spotify.
wow. I have kind of a few thoughts, but sometimes when people get trapped, I think in sort of a pattern that they perceive to be negative, and they need something to kind of yank him out of it. I think on a more like sort of semi-hostile answer, that would be, if you think your thoughts are overwhelming or very important and they're dragging you to the wrong place, maybe you should go to the beach and take all your clothes off and jump into the water and freeze terribly badly. It will remind you of your being.
Mm.
And this is just an extension of a thought of a pianist called Kenny Werner, who wrote a book called Effortless Mastery. And it always cracked me up because it's a violent analogy. which feeds into your question. He said, whenever you think you're like a terrible pianist and you're so terrible and you feel completely burdened by your inability to sound the way you want to sound, and you think you have a problem, you could say you feel like you're completely unfree and burdened. Go to your kitchen and take a plastic bag, put it on your head, and hold it for a minute. And then you'll realize the lack of oxygen is that will be the only thing you'll be able to think of to get actually back out of it. And then think about it again, how you feel about your piano playing. And that's why the analogy, take off your clothes, jump in the water.
Yeah.
It's basically what these two analogies probably do in answer to the question is you gotta reset and to go something more primal, that you're not being lost in your head about your freedom or not. You just gotta like grab what's in front of you and remind yourself. It's almost like shake yourself out of it with a action. That could be physical, maybe it could be mental, but that, I think that's what I would recommend to free yourself from something.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Stefan, I know you are not a huge talker about yourself, but I am going to ask, where can people find more of your work if they're interested in your work? Where can people find events or gigs or concerts that you might be playing? Where can people find you? Wow.
Okay, well, you can look up 3 or 4 things. One of them, masterlinksessions.com. You will see a lot of fun music videos on that channel, masterlinksessions.com. The other one, you can go to my indie label store called funkifylive.com. It's a shop where you can get vinyl and merch and sheet music and big band arrangements. You can go to Redtenbacher's Funkestra.com. Nobody will ever know how to type in Redtenbacher, so try with Funkestra, and even better, hopefully there will be a URL in this description of the podcast.
There will be. I'll put all of these links in there.
So it's Redtenbacher's Funkestra.com. And lastly, there is JoniReimagined.com. That's a project that I'm running. It's about the music of Joni Mitchell. We play her music, and all the tour dates are in all those links. So masterlinksessions.com, reddenbachersfunkestra.com, and JoniReimagined.com. There's links. And if you're interested in buying any of the music, it's funkifylive.com.
Brilliant. And I will put all of those links in the show notes. I wholeheartedly recommend you go and check all of those things out. Stefan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Always, conversations with you are interesting, inspiring, challenging, exactly what I wanted from today. So thank you very much. And thank you very much to everybody for listening. If you're watching on YouTube, you will have seen the man himself. But thank you all so much. I would love to get your take on some of this. So the best way to get in touch with the show is via email, handsupifyou'rehuman@gmail.com. Please rate, review, subscribe, share these podcasts with anybody you think may benefit from them. I genuinely appreciate any thoughts that you would like to share. And I look forward to more interesting conversations with more inspiring people like Stefan. Until then, I wish you a peaceful and joyful few days, and I will speak to you soon.